Hello, I'm going to talk to you about energy today. Energy and its passage through an ecosystem. An ecosystem is defined as a community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. You may want to write that down. All right, we're going to talk about various organisms. When we talk about organisms, we're talking about living things. These are called biotic factors. Biotic factors are things that are alive, living organisms within an ecosystem. So the first category we're going to talk about are producers. Producers are what we call autotrophs. In other words, they make their own food. They usually do this through a process called photosynthesis. Examples of organisms that do that are things like plants, phytoplankton, photosynthetic bacteria, and yes, Venus flytraps are even examples of this. They are still plants. Yes, they can catch flies and get their energy that way, but they get most of their energy through the process of photosynthesis. So other organisms that we can also talk about, or that we'll also talk about, are consumers. Consumers are heterotrophs. Hetero means other, and troph means eater. So these are organisms that eat other organisms in order to get their energy. So there are several types of consumers or heterotrophs. There are herbivores, and herbivores eat plants. Carnivores eat animals. And omnivores, like you and me, eat both plants and animals, or humans eat both plants and animals. And even if you're a vegetarian, you're still considered an omnivore. There are also scavengers, and scavengers actually eat dead animals, which is actually a great benefit. There are also decomposers. Decomposers will also break down waste and dead organisms. What they're doing is they're taking those materials that are found in those dead plants and animals, and they're breaking them down so that they can be reused again. Examples of decomposers are bacteria, fungi, worms. Those are the ones that we most commonly think of. There are also various abiotic factors, and when you put an A in front of something, it means not. So these are non-living things within an ecosystem. So abiotic factors include all the non-living things that affect an ecosystem. Examples are the amount of water, lakes, streams, rivers, rain, things like that, sunlight, oxygen, weather, soil, temperature. Anything in an ecosystem that is not living is called abiotic. Now, energy. Now we get to the point that we're talking about in this. Energy enters an ecosystem as sunlight. That's why I've got this picture in the background of the sun rising on a field of wheat. So sunlight is a very important abiotic factor. When we look at a food chain, we can actually put sunlight into a food chain. A food chain shows one path of the flow of energy. So a food chain shows the flow of energy in an ecosystem. Now it's very important to understand that the arrows show the flow of energy. They show from what organism to what organism the energy is moving. The order of a food chain, the example you see here, is sun. Sun is the energy source. Then you have the producers. The producers are the organisms, again, that make their own food using sunlight energy. And they're eaten by the first level consumers, or also called primary consumers. Primary consumers eat producers. Secondary consumers eat the first level consumers. And decomposers are the organisms that will break down the remains of any of those, either the producers, first level, or secondary consumers that have died. So you can see here, sunlight provides the energy for the producers. The producers do a process called photosynthesis, and what happens is the primary consumers will eat those producers. And then the secondary consumers will eat the primary, and the tertiary will eat the secondary, and the quaternary will eat the tertiary. And the Decomposers will eat all of these organisms or will break down all of these organisms after they've died. Now notice the direction of the arrows. The arrows are pointing toward the organism that is doing the eating. So I've made a note here. You can think of the arrow heads as a mouth. So the cricket is going to open its mouth to eat the grass. The hawk is going to open its mouth to eat the snake, and so on. That'll help you get your arrows in the right direction. So a food webs are just multiple food chains put together. So a food web is a model that shows the energy flow through different organisms in each ecosystem. So it consists of many overlapping food chains. So you can see here the red arrows show the energy moving from the secondary consumer to the tertiary consumer. You can also see that we've got the yellow arrows showing the first level energy being transferred to the second level consumer, and so on. So anytime you see an arrow, the arrow head is at the organism that is doing the consuming. We can arrange these in what are called trophic levels. So trophic literally means to eat. So if we were to put these in levels, you can see here we've got the primary producers, then we've got our plant eaters, which are also called secondary they're called first level consumers or primary consumers. Then we've got our organisms that eat these other animal-like structures. These are our secondary consumers. They're small predators and so on. Then we've got our larger predators, which are our tertiary level, and after tertiary would be quaternary level. Anything after a producer is considered a consumer. It just depends on what level they're at. There are several types of ecological pyramids, and as you can see, let me go back to that previous slide. You can see how these are drawn from the bottom up. Well, what we can do is we can take those organisms and we can literally put them into a pyramid. So a pyramid is used to illustrate the structure of a trophic level or trophic level in a food chain. There are three types of ecological pyramids. There's pyramid of numbers, biomass pyramids, and energy pyramids. And we're going to focus mostly on energy pyramids. But let me show you a pyramid of numbers just to give you an idea. So if we look at the lowest level, this is going to be the widest level on the pyramid because these are our producers. Then we have our primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. And you can see how the numbers of these organisms decreases as we go to the top of the pyramid. That's because there are fewer hawks than there are numbers of snails. There are fewer blackbirds than there are green plants on Earth. So typically the pyramid shape shows the most abundant amount of organisms at the bottom, the least amount at the top. So an energy pyramid, this is what we're mainly going to focus on because we're talking about energy. When an organism eats, it obtains energy. Then it uses a lot of that energy. So when this squirrel eats this grass, it's going to use a lot of that energy in life's process. So through growth and movement and anything that this squirrel does is going to use that energy that it's gotten from this grass. That means that only part of the energy that squirrel has consumed would be available to this bear when the bear eats the squirrel. So this means that only part of the energy is available to the next organism in the food chain. So in an energy pyramid, it illustrates the amount of energy that moves from one feeding level or one trophic level to another in a food chain or a food web. The greatest amount of energy available is at the producer level. That's the organisms that absorb sunlight energy and convert that to food. The least amount of energy available is going to be at the top of the food chain. That's why we have fewer of those types of organisms. Only about 10% of the energy available in any tropic level is transferred to the next level. So if there's 100,000 units of energy available at the producer level, when we go to the primary consumer level, there's only 10,000, and so on as we move on up the food chain. This is called the rule of 10%. In other words, 10% of the energy harvested at the lower tropic level is transferred up to the next higher tropic level. So only 10% of the energy available is transferred from one level to the next. The rest of that energy goes off as heat or is used by the organism for living life. All right, and that's the end of this PowerPoint for you. If you have any questions, come talk to me in class.